JonBenet stole Burke's pineapple. This theory explains all the evidence. Does it? Where do you think the crime occurred? The basement, the kitchen, the lounge, JonBenet's bedroom, Burke's bedroom, or somewhere else? Well, have a look at Burke's oh moment and look at his body language.
Can you describe that to me?
Something.
Okay.
Looks like glass with a tea bag in it.
His arms are folded over his body, his hands tucked under his knees. It's a very guarded posture, isn't it? One of the biggest bombshells in the Ramsey case was this, not just for us, but I think for the Ramseys as well, was the finding in the autopsy showing that JonBenet had eaten after returning home from a Christmas dinner and eaten something fruity, something that wasn't crab, after returning home from the Whites. This suggests one of the last places JonBenet was in the house, if not the last, before she died, was the kitchen.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The autopsy report specifically references yellow fruit material that appears to be pineapple. Can you see it over there? Which may represent fragments of pineapple. And of course, a bowl of pineapple with Patsy and Burke's fingerprints were found right beside the gingerbread houses. But this is the crucial point. Only half eaten. Why did whoever was eating from that bowl not finish it? Why did they stop? There's still quite a lot left in that bowl. Now, regardless of what the food is, the fact that it was so high up in JonBenet's digestive system strongly suggests that JonBenet was up and ambulant after the time that John and Patsy said she was. And clearly, JonBenet was not sleeping when they said she was as well. And if she was up and if she was eating pineapple, that wasn't because an abductor was in the house either writing a ransom note or forcing her to eat a snack. She was there because she was free to do what she wanted to do. And what's more, the pineapple seems to bring her closer to another character in the story, a character that, have you noticed, has been absolutely absent and almost completely quiet throughout. JonBenet's 9, almost 10-year-old brother, Burke, was he up and ambulant as well? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. If you are learning things, if you've never heard of this kind of analysis before, you are welcome to also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So why does Burke seem to be so awkward and so guarded in this moment?
That's the dining room table.
Can you describe that to me?
Big bowl of something.
Okay.
One of the craziest parts of this case, in my opinion, is Detective Kolar's theory, which takes the very important trifecta of evidence and kind of brings it together.
Looks like glass with a tea bag in it.
The assumed pineapple in JonBenet's stomach, the bowl of pineapple and Burke's fingerprints on the bowl near the kitchen, as well as the flashlight standing prominently on the kitchen counter. And what he does is he quickly and conveniently seizes these handy items, and as far as I'm concerned, he sticky tapes these onto each other into a handmade, sort of a ready-made scenario. Now, I've seen some folks following my research into this case saying essentially that Kolo's theory is the best and makes the most sense, that Kolo's theory explains all the evidence found and also correctly identifies where they think the crime occurred. Was it in the basement, the kitchen, the lounge, JonBenét's bedroom, Burke's bedroom, or somewhere else? And so if you subscribe to Kolo's theory, you have to say the crime was committed in the kitchen. But does that make sense? Let's use critical thinking to briefly analyze this theory.
Worth playing for? Yeah.
Right, so let's deal with it now. JonBenet stole Burke's pineapple in the kitchen. This is actually a theory that was dramatized on CBS's The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, and they were subsequently sued for $750 million, and that was the end of that documentary. Now, it's true that this theory does reconcile some very important aspects, the pineapple in the stomach and the pineapple in the kitchen, but it also conjures a brand new perpetrator into the story and does so, certainly as far as I'm concerned, as clumsily as Steve Thomas did with Patsy Ramsey. Now, in this scenario, instead of Patsy flying into a rage over bedwetting, something I believe Patsy really didn't care about because bedwetting was really a constant currency in the Ramsey home. And bear in mind, Patsy had stage 4 cancer for a whole long period of time. Patsy was sort of fairly inured to matters of the body in that respect. And I mean, even worse was happening with excrement. But with Kolo's theory, instead of one member of the family being triggered and enraged at the slightest provocation, now it's another member of the family being triggered in the same way. Now instead of urine upsetting someone, it's a piece of pineapple. Isn't it just a little far-fetched? It's the same, not just simple, but grossly unsophisticated scenario that, again, is, in my opinion, that completely misses and ignores who the people were in this house and what the actual underlying family dynamics really were. Do you understand the child psychology here, the sibling rivalry, the relationships between parents, but also between parents and children, the relationship between one child relative to another to their parents? For example, how did Burke feel about JonBenet getting all the attention in terms of the pageants? How did JonBenet feel about Burke in terms of his response? Now, I'm not sure that this theory really integrates that in any way. Certainly, in terms of the fabric of these events, it doesn't seem to really deal with it in any complex way. Then also, if you have more than a rudimentary knowledge of the Ramsey case, you should know that while Kolo's scenario may join a couple of important dots, it doesn't come close to reconciling all of the evidence. I saw someone saying that, wow, this theory really brings everything together. I don't think it does. You might say, why not? How can you say that? Can you give some examples of what's missing here, the dots that aren't connecting? Well, I'm going to start off by touching on what I feel are the weakest arguments in terms of that, and then work my way up to by far the strongest counter-argument of all right at the end.
Are you sure you want to hear this?
Let's start with A, the flashlight. If you were going to the trouble to hide JonBenet away, and bear in mind this scenario implies carrying JonBenet from the kitchen down to the basement, why would you leave the flashlight not only out in plain sight, but erect, easily visible, standing up, as well as the bowl of pineapple that triggered the whole thing? If you're going to hide JonBenet away, why wouldn't you hide these other items away that are so crucial as well? I mean, you do think the flashlight is the murder weapon here, right? Put up your hand if that's you. Well, if the crime happened in the kitchen, why would you wipe it down? And by the way, the flashlight was dusted for fingerprints. It was, even the batteries were checked and everything was wiped clean. Why would you wipe it down but then still leave such a major puzzle piece out there to begin with if you didn't want someone to be misled in this way? Then B, the bowl of pineapple, and basically the same argument applies. If you're going to go to the effort and time to construct a 3-page ransom note and wipe the flashlight clean and carry JonBenet down to the basement, why wouldn't you wipe down the bowl of pineapple, or better yet, throw out the contents, wash it and stack it away? If it has played such a central role in everything, why wouldn't you want to hide that away? Why leave it out there? C, what is missing from this story? There's actually a lot more to say about the flashlight and why it doesn't qualify, in my opinion, as the murder weapon. You've also got to ask how and why and where JonBenet sustained those curious dark marks. How did that happen? Where did that happen? Because it couldn't have happened in the kitchen. D, what else is missing? This scenario also doesn't explain any of the blood evidence found at the scene, or why her clothing was changed, or why she was wiped down. E, it excludes the elephant in the room. So it doesn't come close to dealing with the shadow of something else that is associated with this case as well. Do you know what I'm referring to? And it's referenced specifically in the autopsy as well. In general, this theory doesn't explain why. It also doesn't explain many of the other things, the other artifacts that were associated with finding her. The duct tape, the string loosely tied around her wrist, and so on. And if you want to take all of that and dismiss that as staging, well, I think you're delusional. I think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And then that brings us to F. What happened to the failure to protect aspect of the indictment? Remember, the grand jury was shown evidence and they came to a decision which had a bearing on both John and Patsy. And so how does Kolo's theory line up with that, with the grand jury's, let's call it the neglect narrative, if that's the best way to describe it? How would JonBenet's parents be able to foresee or be expected to prevent childish peak of this nature, something spontaneous, random, unexpected, and impulsive? Why would that be their fault? Now, if none of all of this convinces you, then I think this should, and that brings us to the counter-argument. Kolo's theory avoids the finding in the autopsy report that the blow and the asphyxia were almost simultaneous. And if you read between the lines, it does seem as though the autopsy report seems to place the asphyxia first. Also, if JonBenet was struck a lethal blow to the head in the kitchen, we wouldn't see petechial hemorrhages of the sort we see typically and classically associated with asphyxia. Some people seem to think the asphyxia occurred post-mortem. I don't. And the autopsy, the way I read it, doesn't seem to support that either. There are many more reasons to believe the two injuries were simultaneous, but I'm not going to go into them here. The value, I think, in Kolo's theory was that several years into the fabric of the Ramsey case, it showed a completely different scenario to Smith's intruder theory as well as Steve Thomas's theory that Patsy did it. And I think what it did was it opened the door, at least for some people, to consider the possibility that the way they'd been thinking about this case for years hadn't been examined carefully. Well, not nearly enough.
Are you frightened?
Yes.
Not nearly frightened enough.
Now, I don't think the Ramsey case is nearly as convoluted, complicated, or difficult as many imagine. I do think the genius in this case lies in the many areas where a strategically placed off note offers the opportunity to, let's call it, ruin the whole symphony, as it were. And what we've seen, even with 3 excellent detectives armed with all the evidence they could ever dream of, all 3 of them were suckers somewhere for that off note. We must be careful not to make the same mistake.
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.